We've learned through the pandemic we can never be caught unprepared again. And so many Americans, when COVID hit, they had nothing in the house. Stores were shut down, and doctors' offices were shut down, and even
Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
In the shadows of the Cold War, a covert operation unfolded that would reshape the course of history. Welcome to a deep dive into Operation Gladio, a clandestine network with far-reaching implications on geopolitics. Join us as we unveil the secrets of this covert world. Our story begins in the aftermath of World War II. Europe lay in ruins, divided by ideology, and the specter of communism loomed large. In this precarious atmosphere, Operation Gladio was born. Key players emerged in this covert symphony, led by NATO and the CIA. Their objective: to resist a potential Soviet invasion and prevent the spread of communism in Western Europe. It was a chess game of politics and power. Operating under the cloak of secrecy, Gladio recruited a shadow army of spies, soldiers, and assets. These dedicated individuals were trained to be the unseen defenders of democracy, with Europe as their battleground. Secret underground bases were established across Europe, serving as arms caches, safe houses, and command centers. These covert installations lay hidden beneath the facade of everyday life, ready to be activated in times of crisis. Over the years, Gladio was involved in a web of clandestine operations, including sabotage, espionage, and intelligence gathering. Their activities extended far beyond defense, often blurring the lines between covert action and political manipulation. But as the Cold War thawed, questions arose about the true nature of Gladio. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, the need for a secret stay-behind army seemed to diminish. The operation's existence was exposed, and the world demanded answers. Scholars, historians, and investigators began to unravel the complexities of Gladio. Some claim it had morphed into a tool of manipulation, interfering in the politics of sovereign nations. Shockwaves rippled through Europe as the truth emerged. Operation Gladio had indeed taken on a life of its own, with allegations of involvement in covert operations and political assassinations. The revelations shook public trust in governments and institutions, sparking protests and demands for transparency. The very democracy Gladio was designed to protect seemed to be at risk. The legacy of Operation Gladio still resonates today. It forces us to confront difficult questions about the balance between security and individual freedoms, the role of secrecy in our governments, and the enduring influence of the Cold War on our world. As we reflect on Operation Gladio, we are reminded that history is often more complex than it first appears. In the shadows, where governments and agencies make decisions that shape our world, the truth can be elusive, but we have to seek it. As one wise man once said, the only real security that a man can have in this world is a reserve of knowledge, experience, and ability. So, let us continue to seek knowledge, question authority, and remain vigilant, for the echoes of Operation Gladio still reverberate in
Operation Gladio's Unholy Alliance. Welcome to Whistleblower Wednesday one more time at the Rob Maness Show live on Patriot.tv and Xspace's simulcast. Well, a secret alliance forged at the close of World War II by the CIA, the Sicilian and U.S. mafias, and the Vatican to thwart the possibility of a communist invasion of Europe? Come on. Well, journalist Paul Williams presents evidence suggesting the existence of the stay-behind units you just heard about in many European countries, consisting of 5,000 to 15,000 military operatives. Williams argues in his book that Operation Gladio soon gave rise to the toppling of governments, wholesale genocide, the formation of death squads, financial scandals on a grand scale, the creation of the Mujahideen, an international narcotics network, and even included ties to the current Pope, Pope Francis. Well, my guest today to discuss this complex story is retired Air Force Colonel Roxanne Towner Watkins, a business owner and chairwoman of the Polk County, Florida Moms for Liberty chapter, and really busy on Rumble because she puts out a lot of information and reviews a lot of documents, books, and those kind of things. Colonel, welcome to the Rob Maness Show. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I guess let's start at the beginning. Give folks, a 1 minute on your background, your military background especially, and why you do what you do, because I think it's very interesting.
So actually, I realize you and I have a lot in common. I obviously was prior service as well. I started off working on aircraft for 8 years, both on active duty and as a civilian at Stanford Field when I was on my ROTC scholarship to finish up my degree and get my commission as a second lieutenant. So kudos to us both. And obviously the emphasis on education in the military gives you an interesting quest for knowledge. And after I retired, I was able to spend a lot more time reading and investigating different aspects. And I stumbled across a gentleman by the name of Anthony Sutton. And he presented a concept that I had never saw presented anywhere. And that is that there is this international group of people that we would once upon a time call the mercantilist, that globally went around and monopolized resources. And prior to the World War I and World War II, they did it in a completely different way that left them at risk of being arrested for international crimes. And it's as if those entities after World War II all became housed in official government entities like the CIA. And while Paul Williams does focus on the CIA, General Gehlen, who was an SS general in the Nazi Corps in Germany, created the BND, which is the CIA version for West Germany. So yes, I did say that the SS general from Hitler became the West Germans' first chief of intel for Chancellor Adenauer after World War II. And he was the father of the stay behind unit concepts. In 1942, he hired Otto Skorzeny to be the trainer for Operation Gladio that would be put in existence through all of the Axis territories on the off chance that they were going to get overran either from the west or the east. They'd have these pop-up units to be able to attack from the rear. That concept was actually found originally in the Boer Wars in the southern part of Africa, when a young reporter went down there and with the British Army when they were trying to steal gold and diamonds from the Boers. And the Boers used the stay behind concept in order to defeat a much superior British army. And that reporter was Winston Churchill. And so that concept got brought back to Europe and implemented between World War I and then on to World War II. So Hitler used it extensively throughout the Axis territory. General Gehlen bought his freedom and his new job in the West German Chancellor office with Alan Dulles, who created the NATO version of the stay behind units and embedded it in NATO. And so there's a fascinating dialogue between Gehlen and Dulles. They brought Gehlen into the United States in a 4-star Army uniform to debrief him on how the entire thing worked and the concept as far as setting it up. So it's a fascinating.
Yeah, that's one of the things I want to dive into with you. I mean, is why this is important. You know, just before we came on, Roxanne, breaking news: the Slovak Prime Minister
Correct.
had an assassination attempt on him just days after he announced that his country would not support the World Health Organization pandemic treaty and would not ever support it. So he's fighting against this international organization that's trying to subsume sovereignty from all of the Western nations, all the nations really in the world. So I find it interesting because, and I wanted to point that out to the audience because that's why I wanted to discuss Gladio, because you mentioned the stay behind units. So there were basically 3 pieces of the original operation, right? The stay behind Nazis that were connected to by the West and NATO, right, through General Gehlen, and then the mafias out of Sicily and Italy, and then the Vatican. So how did the West get control of the Nazi stay behind troops? I mean, because Gehlen, yeah, he's a general and everything and in charge of West Germany intelligence, but he's not European wide. So how did they make that connection through the leadership down at the all the way to the tactical level, so they thought they could be reliable?
So the tactical level was already in existence through all of the Axis territory. Dulles, obviously, as the new CIA director, has already made this deal with Gehlen. So he is going to put it through all of the Allied territory. So they have everything they need. And keep in mind, the first NATO commander is Eisenhower. Eisenhower becomes the president, and it is through Eisenhower that the first findings to assassinate foreign leaders get signed. So it was a very well organized effort throughout NATO. And as a matter of fact, if you go back to 1947 and 1948, as they're standing this entire apparatus up, the very first influence peddling operation using Gladio operatives happens in Italy when the CIA spends $5 million to interfere in their election. They had two primary candidates. One was very pro-NATO, and one did not want to be part of NATO because they had just got rid of Mussolini. They wanted their freedom, and they wanted to be able to orchestrate their new government the way they wanted to. Well, the influence peddling campaign worked, and the NATO-friendly guy got elected, the Christian Democrat, and the Christian Democrat basically has ran this entire operation on the political side throughout all of Europe. If you look at Germany and you look at Italy and you look at many of the other countries over there, and throughout South America, quite frankly, the Christian Democrat Party is alive and well and has played a huge part of this. It's probably worth, since you mentioned the different pieces, it's probably worth giving a visual. The way I portray this entire operation is, if you were can imagine a wagon wheel, the entire wagon wheel encompasses Operation Gladio. They have 3 spokes. They have drug trafficking, because this is all black ops. None of this is funded in appropriated funds. So you have drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, and human trafficking. And those spokes are greased by blackmail so that you can keep the wagon wheel rolling. So this entire Operation Gladio entity is basically a paramilitary capability to weld power on behalf of what I consider, what I call an international syndicate. Because the people that are controlling this and decides what governments stay and what governments go obviously coordinate with each other. I don't try to draw a diagram of what that is. Mike Benz calls it the blob. I think the blob is too nebulous because it's evil and it's actually criminal in nature when you're taking down entire governments. So I prefer the international syndicate label. But you have a syndicate that is operating, controlling a paramilitary force, and that paramilitary force is Operation Gladio. And it is global. It is not isolated to just NATO. The version that operated in South America was referred to as Operation Condor, but it is every bit a part of Operation Gladio as Operation Gladio itself.
Well, we got to take our first break because we got to do commercials to pay for this thing. But when we come back, we'll see another little video. It's just very interesting, recruiting fascists and Nazis. I'm very interested in that and how that leads into today. Because look, I believe even though there may not be an Operation Gladio formally in existence, the operational lines of communication, strategies, and resources are still operating in a way that makes one believe that the wagon wheel is still there. And we're talking with Colonel Retired Roxanne Towner Watkins about this organization, the issue, and how it applies to today's world. We'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show. It's Whistleblower Wednesday at Patriot.tv.
The world is about to shift. Banks are going cashless globally with the emergence of central bank digital currency, which will bring with it programmable money and the ability to turn on or off your purchasing power based on your digital social profile. It's like the equivalent of spyware in your bank account. You need to get out of the system with the world's safest and most private assets, silver and gold. Call Kirk Elliott, PhD at 877-547-5743. That's 877-KIRK-PhD.
Sounds rolling, all 3 cameras, we're good. Andy, speed.
Is there any regrets that you have in life? I should sit here and say, yeah, I got a lot of regrets. But when I look back on my life and I understand the lives that were lost, I mean, I'm sitting here with you. And I can tell my story.
Former National Security Advisor Lieutenant General Michael Flynn pleaded guilty today to lying to the FBI.
He was one of the most respected generals in the military.
He was, by definition, the most dangerous possible person for Donald Trump to hire.
Really brilliant military career, serving 33 years.
Why was he being so elusive?
Mike Flynn told the truth and faced life in prison.
Every American needs this historical DVD keepsake. Flynn delivered the truth, whatever the cost. Hand signed by General Michael Flynn, one of America's most treasured military heroes. Order now at the Patriot TV store. Go to Patriot TV, click on Store, and grab a once-in-a-lifetime chance to own a treasured piece of American history. And get your own personal download link to watch America's most talked-about movie, as well as a DVD hand-signed by General Michael Flynn. Use promo code PTV at checkout to get special savings. The Patriot TV store. Incredible savings and a secure, hassle-free shopping experience.
As the Germans withdrew, they left secret agents in the countries they had occupied. The secret services call such groups stay-behinds. For the retreating Germans, they were the staunchest believers. They were selected from the SS and the fascist Black Legions. They were to become the foot soldiers of the next war about to begin, the Cold War.
Le Palais des Sports de Bruxelles a été le théâtre d'une manifestation monstre consacrée au thème « Réunion de tous les peuples européens dans la lutte contre le bolchevisme ».
Nous avions vu là-bas, dans les plaines de Russie, les Italiens et les Croates, les Hongrois, les Norvégiens, les Danois, les Hollandais, nos frères flamands. Nous nous retrouvions tous là-bas, 100 ans déjà, cette force énorme qui se soulevait de toutes parts. Pourquoi? Parce qu'eux aussi ont eu cette illumination de la vérité. Allons avec foi au combat.
Ahead of the advancing Allies, always with the first troops, was the OSS, Office of Strategic Services. And that part of the OSS charged with locating enemy stay-behinds had been given the designation X2.
I came in and sent by General Donovan and got in touch with the heads of the Committee of National, the military junta of the Committee of National, which is the joint partisan groups. Andy Birding was the first X2 guy who came into Rome. And he'd been an old AP correspondent, and I thought I could trust him, that he was a good guy. And so we turned over to him everything we had on the German stay-behinds. Then Jim Angleton appeared in August. He began recruiting fascists because he figured that the best way to control the communists was to hire fascists. One of the most tough ones was Prince Valerio Borghese, who ran what was known as the 10th Flotilla. These are the guys that would execute partisans and hang them from lampposts all over.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Whistleblower Wednesday, and we're talking about Operation Gladio and what you were watching there in that little incoming clip was an OSS officer and talking about these stay-behind German soldiers, Nazi soldiers, and the concept that we covered in the first segment with Colonel Towner Watkins, retired, who is my guest today. And Roxanne, I just wanted to frame this segment up with that clip and continue our discussion about the operation and how it worked. You know, that adds in a little bit of the partisan fascist network in Italy, I think, that the OSS folks were tapping into even before they were able to get a formal structure built with General Gehlen, the former SSS general that was the head of West German intelligence. Am I right on that?
You are. And that gentleman, when you listen to what he's saying about how the OSS was embedded in the Adlon teams as they came into this theater, because Alan Dulles had already started conversations with Gehlen. He knew they were there. They did not want our service people disrupting the stay-behind units. So they were exploring where they were and kind of ferreting them out in a protective manner because they intended to use them after the war was over, as early as the end of the war. And as far as them being around today, let me draw a direct correlation between the coup that happened in 2014 in Ukraine and these stay-behind units that General Gehlen, with Otto Skorzeny as their trainer, set up in Poland and the Ukraine area. You will read a lot about the OUN operating in modern day Ukraine. There were two, OUN-B for Bandera and OUN-M, and that one was named after a guy whose last name was Lebed, Mikhail Lebed. Those two entities evolved into Azov Battalion and Right Sector. So they are present today. They literally honor Bandera as the granddaddy of their movement. He was personally trained by Otto Skorpion.
And Bandera was part of the Ukrainian German SS units in World War II.
He was part of the state behind. Yes.
Yeah. Well, we've got a question over in our audience. We do have a live audience here that over in our X Spaces audience. And I'll just remind you guys over in the audience to put your hand up once you get a mic, and keep your mic muted until I call for the question. Patriot Rob is our host today. Rob, who's got a question? And let's go with it.
She dropped down for some reason, Colonel. I'm trying to bring her back up. She was having a hard time hearing at one point. So let me see if I can get her back up.
Okay. Well, anybody else have a question in the audience that we can take now? If not, we'll just move on. And when I see the hands raised, folks in the audience, I will come to you, time permitting, during the show. Obviously, I mute during the commercials so the host can talk to the audience over there. So the network becomes part of NATO. Is that correct? Do I have that correct?
Yes. NATO created a CPC, which was Clandestine Planning Committee, and an ACC, which was Allied Clandestine Committee. Those two entities had quarterly meetings. And the reason we know that is in 1990, when this got the entire Italian network got exposed, the Prime Minister Andreotti was kind of called on the carpet to answer to the Italian population, and the rest of Europe all pled ignorance as to, we don't know anything about this. And it was exposed on August 2nd, 1990. In October, there was a meeting of one of these committees in Belgium. And after that meeting in November, when all of them the reporters were going around to the different prime ministers and presidents throughout Europe and asking them, hey, where's our stay behind units? Do we have them? What do they look like? And everybody was going, we don't know what you're talking about. We don't have anything like that. Andreotti got on television and said, oh, no, you're not. I'm not going down by myself. Not only do you all have them, they just met last month, and he starts reading off the attendees at the meeting. So it was unequivocally clear, all of the countries, there was a secret agreement that they had to sign in order to be in NATO to say that they were going to set up these stay behind units.
Yeah, and we have classified programs like that all the time. And I, just for the audience, before I go back, I think we've got the audience member that had the question back up on the stage. But before we go back to that, from a budget perspective, the reason why the American people never or rarely find out about these things, and you just mentioned that the Italian Prime Minister revealed Gladio in 1990 publicly, is that the budget system, we have a black military budget that very few of the congressional people that vote on it to approve it get to actually see the details of. We have a black military intelligence budget that, again, most people, especially even the ones in Congress that vote to approve it, don't get to see the details of. And then we have an intelligence black budget for outside of military intelligence, the civilian intelligence agencies. So that's how these operations get funded, and they get kept totally secret and cloaked, even through the funding streams, which is quite often how they get discovered, because the funding streams get discovered. Am I right, Colonel Towner?
Well, in this particular case, you're right about everything you said, but I don't believe that 90% of that applies to Gladio, because that's where the Vatican came in. They were using the sale of drugs from Southeast Asia to fund this operation, and they were money laundering through the Vatican Bank. the IOR, it also just so happens to have been created in 1942, around the same time and I'm not saying that's correlated. It is a weird kind of coincidence that the operation in Germany was set up in 1942, as was the IOR banking system. Now, they had Catholic banks before that, but they were under the guise of the Italian government. The Vatican Bank, once it was given sovereignty, created the IOR, and they were charging this operation a 10% handling fee on all of the black ops money that they were generating via heroin cells. And the war on drugs in 1940 or 1970 something, late 60s, that Nixon announced actually was a war on the Corsican mafia portion of this operation, because the CIA and the mafia that we sponsored in Sicily wanted the entire control of this operation and the profits. So they ended up between 1968 and 1972 eliminating the Corsican mafia that had been being ran out of Vietnam, and using that as in the Philippines, the Thailand and Burma as their avenue for drug heroin to the processing pharmaceutical company in France under the Corsican mafia control. So they wanted to eliminate them. So the war was actually the war on the competition, because after the conversion from the Corsican mafia to the Sicilian mafia, the drug use and availability in the United States went up 5 times.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why they use these type operations to create their funding streams and everything, because the less connectivity to even the black budgets in the United States government, the more protected your operation is. Well, we've got our audience question back, I think. Let's go over to Patriot Rob, the host of our X Spaces audience, and Silence. Are you back with us to ask your question?
I do. I actually have 2 questions. And I'm sorry I was in and out because I wasn't able to hear it all the time, and you may have talked about this, but I'm just curious about the role of NGOs in Gladio, knowing how they work after many of the conflicts. They are on the ground and continue. And then the other one, Rob, was about FISO. And if this was perpetrated by a liberal progressive, looks like, possibly a political hit, would have a broader impact on the region. Thanks.
Okay, great questions. And you're talking about Prime Minister Fico of the Slovak country. Yeah. Okay, that assassination attempt. Okay, so great questions, Colonel. First one, take that one on, the NGO play in this. And we know today, I talk about it all the time when I talk about illegal aliens coming into the country, that NGOs are openly funded by the United States to facilitate bringing people in that are not just people that seeking political asylum, but enemies of the United States of America. I'm sure that's going on in other parts of the world. What's the play of these non-governmental organizations? I mean, you just mentioned the Vatican banking system. Is there any other broader reach? Because we're talking assassination attempts, terrorism, sabotage, non-kinetic propaganda, influence operations, those kind of things. So I would assume that there would have to be a vast network of NGOs, wouldn't there?
It is a vast network, and it was originally managed out of the AID, which was the predecessor to USAID. And if you go back and you look at the history of AID and the State Department and the CIA, as it relates to Operation Gladio, are fused at the hip. The CPC was originally Frank Wisner, ran that in the State Department before the creation of the CIA. They just literally took that segment of the State Department out and put it into the CIA with him in charge. So there was literally no difference from one day to the next in the operation of these covert clandestine operations. And yes, there are a number of non-governmental organizations, ones that we've ran across. They love using the words anti-communist because they created this entire thing under the auspices that they were fighting communists. So they named everything. Look at the anti-communist league that's in the Caribbean. There's an anti-communist league that was in South America. There was a world anti-communist league that was created in Taiwan by Chiang Kai-shek, who was like the world's biggest drug dealer. And he was the source of much of the heroin going to the Corsican mafia and later the Sicilian mafia. So they created these NGOs. Another one is the World Wildlife Foundation. They were coming in to buy up based on World Bank loans in these third world countries that couldn't pay the loans back. They would trade the paying off the loan for monopoly use of property in these countries, generally in Africa. And then they would create large-scale gladio training facilities in these countries in order to train these operators to then disperse them all over the world to control the drug routes, create gangs like in Colombia and Mexico and El Salvador. So there is a whole litany of NGOs that are involved in this network.
Well, we got to take another commercial break, unfortunately, because this is a fascinating conversation. And we will come back, and when we come back, we'll dive more into the mafia connection a little bit. I want to get Colonel Watkins' take on some of the historical knowledge we have now that it was identified in the early 90s of what type of operations these guys did with Gladio and how that may be linked to today as we go through the second half of the show here. So we'll be right back with our guest, retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Towner Watkins, on Whistleblower Wednesday, talking Operation Gladio.
Darktalk.com, darktalk.com. Now you hit that website, that's exclusive to Patriot.tv, so you're able to also help your family and support our network to keep us going as well. Let's go to not only satellite phones, but then you just have regular phones as well, regular mobile phones as well. So you can click satellite phones, or you go back to the top, click secure phones. So this gives you various cell phones.
We are protecting your privacy in ways that no one else does. We've talked about how your cell phone is a government tracking device, how it archives where you've been, what you're up to, who you're talking with, what you're searching on the web, and that information is not private. It is available to the cell phone companies and often sold or used against people in court, right? With these phones, and I'm not trying to say that these are for criminals, these are for people who want the privacy that they are afforded by the Constitution, right? Because we don't think that it's our job to track you. It is our job to provide you with communications so you can go about your daily life.
We've learned through the pandemic we can never be caught unprepared again. And so many Americans, when COVID hit, they had nothing in the house. Stores were shut down and doctors' offices were shut down. And even if doctors prescribed drugs, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, pharmacists wouldn't fill the prescriptions. That was a nightmare.
Now the situation is much worse. We have these horrible supply chain problems. In our emergency medical kit at the Wellness Company, we have 8 prescription drugs that are all potentially life-saving.
Most people who died with COVID, they died in the hospital because they didn't receive early treatment.
Every American family should have one of these.
I can tell you the Wellness Company kit is the answer.
In the shadows of the Cold War, a secret operation was brewing. Operation Gladio, a covert NATO mission, sought to counter communist influence in Europe. But here's the twist. They enlisted the help of an unlikely ally, the Mafia. Yes, you heard it right. The same Mafia that was infamous for their criminal activities. Under the guise of fighting communism, Operation Gladio worked hand in hand with the Italian Mafia. They provided intelligence, resources, and even collaborated on covert operations. This unholy alliance blurred the lines between law enforcement and organized crime. But why would NATO partner with criminals, you ask? Well, desperate times call for desperate measures. The Mafia had deep connections and insider knowledge that proved valuable in the fight against communism. This shocking revelation exposed the dark side of the Cold War, where the ends justified the means. So next time you think you know all the secrets of history, remember, the truth is sometimes stranger than fiction.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show, and it's Whistleblower Wednesday, and our guest is retired Air Force Colonel Roxanne Towner Watkins, and we're talking Operation Gladio, both from a historical perspective and coming up to modern day. And Roxanne, Silence's second question was about the assassination attempt that we talked about at the breaking news at the front of the show about the Prime Minister of Slovak. And he had just days ago said, we're not playing with the WHO pandemic treaty. We're not going to do that. He pushes back on providing weapons to Ukraine, along with Viktor Orban of Hungary, and their close friends and everything. And Silence's question was about, is this a political hit job? And is this a indicator of a modern day Operation Gladio type event?
So obviously 48-hour rule. What I will tell you is if you go back and you look at this man's history, he is anti-globalist. He is a nationalist. And that in terms of this international syndicate is basically a dead man walking sentence throughout history. So to steal some of John Brennan's terminology, it has all of the hallmarks of an Operation Gladio event. Time will tell, obviously, but in some of these cases, if you went back last summer, when he was making a lot of noise about, I'm not going to go along with the push to arm Ukraine, I'm not going to spend our money to send it to Ukraine. He is anti trans. He is very vocal about going against all of the mainstream EU, US talking points. And that is, and it has been historically a targeting, kind of like, here I am kind of thing. And that's what I was saying originally when you and I began talking about, you start seeing hit pieces in the media because it is a conglomerate attack. And the hit pieces started last summer. And just as I was saying about the New York Times article that came out 2 weeks before they did the hit on Russia, they laid the foundation as we walk through this as to who they're going to target next. And once you understand Gladio and how it works, and to the extent that they will go to achieve their end goal, nothing is off the table.
Yeah, what are some of the historical incidents that we learned about Gladio once the Italians revealed its existence in the early 90s? Are there some specific historical actions or activities or incidents that we can point to frame up the discussion of today with a foundation of fact?
There's over 75. I'll give you the two that I use most often: JFK's assassination and Lumumba from the Congo. If you go back and you study Lumumba's assassination, not only did Otto Skorzeny train the assassins that went down and assassinated him, but Otto Skorzeny actually went in theater with them. He was present in Katanga at the time that he was assassinated. They not only kidnapped him, they killed him, buried him, and then after the fact decided they couldn't risk leaving his body intact because they'd martyred him, and they dug him up, chopped him up, and boiled him in acid. Those were Belgian soldiers that did that. And how do we know that? Because one of the Belgian NCOs in 2020 returned a gold teeth he stole out of his mouth to the family in the Congo. So you can go back and walk hand through hand of, or event through event of how that assassination attempt happened, who was involved in it. And the best resource to do that with is a retired Air Force intel guy by the name of Major Ganis, Ganis. He wrote a book. He bought all of Otto Skorzeny's personal papers at an auction, and has used those to create the book that he wrote called the Skorzeny Papers. And he walks you through step by step the assassins used for the hit job. And oh, by the way, the Secretary General of the UN was assassinated by these same troops on his way to solve the issue and create a peace agreement with the Congo because they weren't interested in a peace agreement. So his plane shot out of the air and he's murdered as well.
So what was important about the Congo leadership, Lumumba, to remove him? Earth.
Uranium. He had the world's largest supply in 1960 of uranium in the Katanga area, and the Belgium monopolized it because it had been a Belgian colony right up until his election. He was the first elected prime minister, and they had a sole contract with the U.S. for all uranium. Lumumba wasn't against the U.S. having the uranium. He wanted a better deal and to cut the Belgians out because he was a free country. So he was using his freedom from Belgium to go to the U.S. And he came here. Eisenhower wouldn't meet with him because he wasn't interested in cutting Belgium out. And so Lumumba went back hat in hand and realized that he was going to come under attack because the Belgians then told him that he wasn't going to be allowed to appoint any officers in his own military, that the officer, he could put enlisted people in, but the Belgian officers were going to remain. That's when he reached out to the Soviet Union to make other arrangements. And that's the first time he got labeled a communist, was when he reached out to the Soviet Union. He was not a communist. None of this network has to do with anti-communist. That's what they sold it as. It was we're going to be in charge. You're going to do whatever we tell you to do. And if you decide to disagree with us, we are going to use the threat of communism and we're going to label you a communist. And when we do that, we will mine your harbors as they did in Nicaragua. We are going to boycott you in every trade deal. And we're basically going to attack you. They created the world's largest NATO base around the Katanga uranium mines and basically cut the entire country in half. They actually succeeded and said, we're a new country, and the U.S. and Britain immediately and Belgium recognized this Katanga breakaway country as a new country only because it contained their supply of uranium. And the people that went...
Yeah, I just wanted to, before we go to the break, real quick, take a look at the Kennedy assassination through the lens of Gladio as one of those two incidents.
Same people, OAS. So OAS was a Gladio cell that was originally made up of French assassins, who, by the way, tried to assassinate Charles de Gaulle over 20 times, which is the reason why NATO was kicked out of France and moved to Belgium in the first place. So they tried to... Yeah. So these OAS guys, two of them documented in Dallas on 22 November 1963, trained by Otto Skorzeny. One of them was escorted by the, there goes that thing. I use my hands too much. One of them was escorted to the Mexican border, and one was flown out by a CIA agent, Ferrari, out of Dallas that night.
Wow. So it's amazing. I mean, RFK Jr. has said that he thinks the CIA killed both his dad and his uncle. As we know, the CIA is part of whatever remains of Gladio, even in those days.
Correct.
So there's a linkage there that's got to be buried somewhere in the documents that still haven't been revealed yet. And I believe that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has seen them. And believes that. So, well, we got to take our last break, but when we come back, we're going to go full into today, because Jack Posobiec, my friend, former intelligence officer, did an interview right after the Moscow attack that happened just a few weeks ago, talking to Alex Jones, and it's interesting what he said, and he mentions Gladio. We'll be right back with our guest, Colonel Towner Watkins, U.S. Air Force retired, talking Whistleblower Wednesday at Patriot.tv in a moment.
BellaPay.com.
Let me explain to you what this is. This is an elixir. It's a daily elixir. It is a collagen, and it also has something known as astaxanthin that crosses the brain-blood barrier, that's loaded with antioxidants to take on the free radicals. And then it has something called cat's claw. That is from a bark on a vine in Peru. So these are 3 very powerful ingredients. Now, if you go to bellapatriot.com, there are your science and clinical trials, right? And if you want to read the science, there it is. You don't get nearly 80 clinical trials for nothing. So again, you want to talk about science, the information behind it, this is it. We highly urge you to check it out. The results for Melissa and I have been very powerful. She and I take it each and every day. It's very simple. You just rip the top, drink it, and then throw away the container. We would urge you to go there, order it now, click and order now, and get your subscription.
Consumers often ask, what should I expect when I take the Bella Grace Elixir? And the answer's varied. It really depends on what your health and wellness needs are. I would consider this as your foundational core product for a whole range of health and wellness issues. Let me give you a few examples. If you're a little bit older and you have some joint health issues, some problems with mobility and discomfort, the elixir is going to be your best friend. If you have some skin health issues, wrinkles, hydration, aging, all of those elements are going to be benefited from the elixir, including age spots. Now, if you're in a younger demographic, maybe visual health is where you need some assistance. Eye fatigue, dry eyes, all of those are going to be benefited by the elixir. It's a core product because it benefits so many.
The issue is that Russia hasn't taken the bait yet. They want Russia to roll into Western Ukraine, to roll into Transnistria, to roll into a NATO neighbor, whether it's Finland or whether it's Poland, one of the Baltic states. And so that's why these provocations are going not, and unfortunately, Alex, this isn't going to be the last one. This isn't going to be the last one. This is going to be the first of a new.
That's right. The State Department says brace for more. The State Department says brace for more attacks.
I hadn't even seen that. So this is Operation Gladio 2.0, and people need to understand that it is now kicked off. It is now commenced. We are in the midst of Operation Gladio 2.0, and it is not going to stop until the people behind it are stopped. That's the clear thing. And Alex, when we went through the history of all of these different things, this is an irregular communist revolution that we are living through. The globalists are behind it now. And what we found is that these people will not stop until they are stopped.
While other networks lie to you about what's happening now, InfoWars tells you the truth about what's happening next.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show here on Whistleblower Wednesday. We're talking about Operation Gladio, as Jack Posobiec just put it, but he's referring to the concert attack, and our guest today is retired Air Force Colonel Roxanne Towner-Watkins. She has studied this quite extensively. And Roxanne, I wanted to dive into the current situation, really, and devote this last segment to what's happening in the world today. Now, why would Jack, a former Navy intelligence officer, say this is Gladio 2.0?
So I'm going to take exception to the fact that it's not Gladio 2.0, because that infers that Gladio stopped and then at some point began again. This is the entire, so it's never stopped. This is an ongoing operation. That's number one. Number two, it is not about communism. This has nothing to do with communism. Communism is a crutch that they use to implement this. This has everything to do with fascism, and there's a distinct difference between those two, because fascism incorporates a mercantilistic portion of it. These are globalist business people who demand monopoly resource access that is behind this entire thing. It has nothing to do with communism. The last thing they want is communism, because they go away during communism. The government plans it, and they have to be part of the government. They want to be billionaires. They want access to everything, and they want to keep their riches. And it's more the totalitarian Mussolini model, where you have the businesses that buy the political people. They put the political people in, and they basically dance to their strings. So you have, it's a
Well,
puppet
wait a minute.
show.
That sounds like what just happened in Nebraska yesterday, where in Nebraska Congressional District 2, where the representative of the military-industrial complex and intelligence agencies was reelected over an America First challenger in the Republican primary.
Correct.
So you mean that person that's serving in that seat's not really serving the voters that vote for him? Because obviously they did vote, but he's really making decisions based on his puppet masters that are pulling the strings.
And that's and I take exception with anybody that calls this communism. I understand what communism is, and I'm not a communist sympathizer by any means, but words matter. Words matter. And this is not communism. This is fascism. And if you look around the world, of 74 coups that we orchestrated, either soft coups where we took the guy out of office and didn't kill him, or hard coups where we actually assassinated him, every single one of them was installed a fascist dictator. Not a communist dictator, a fascist dictator. And those patterns matter. And I would argue that that's what happened in 2020.
I think what's going on, and let me get your take on this, because I see the term communist used interchangeably with Nazi and fascist these days. But one of the foundations of the tactics and strategy that's going on to divide all of us, is critical theory. And that comes out of the Marxist Institute, later called Frankfurt School. And those guys and gals from that institution all ended up at Columbia University. And that's where that stuff emanates from, the critical theory stuff does. So I think that causes people to revert to whatever their favorite authoritarian term is for government. But I agree with you. The coupling of corporations with the political government, not just in a informal way, but a formal way, like public-private partnerships, is classical definition of fascism. And Mussolini was following that. Yeah, absolutely. But I just think people use those terms to note the danger, because any authoritarianism and totalitarianism, especially that takes over the United States of America, is extremely dangerous for anybody that loves freedom. Am I wrong on that?
No. And the problem that I have is exactly what you talked about, the Hegelian dialect, where you have the left and the right, where they actually set that up. We like to think of things in opposites. And so they call the left communism and the right fascism, which it's absolutely not true. They are all forms of total control. The far right is anarchy, no control, a republic, a democracy, and then on down that control line. And to me, the easiest way was my husband pointing out to me the old show Get Smart. You remember that show? That show had two entities, the good guys and the bad guys. Do you remember what they were called? Chaos and control.
That's right.
They create chaos so they can control us. And they're telling us to get smart.
Yeah, it's interesting. But it is very interesting, especially when you think about that operation in Moscow at the concert. And all that we now know about it, where they came from. At the same time, we were learning about the CIA bases along the eastern border of Ukraine and Russia. So those operations, NATO's so heavily invested and involved, and the intelligence services obviously are invested and involved. And it really has nothing to do with communism the way we know about it from a Soviet perspective. Nothing. It has everything to do with totalitarianism. And whose version of totalitarianism wins, I think.
And where did those people that orchestrated that terror attack train at? Because you and I both know their training sites matter. the cell phone towers trace them back to Turkey. And do you know what's important about Turkey? Turkey has the largest Gladio apparatus ever orchestrated. They had the second biggest military trained by us. You know, we had all of the Turkey officers in all of our schools, and their Grey Wolf units, which was what their werewolf, Grey Wolf, in Turkey. And what happened immediately after that terror attack? Erdogan, who is outside their control, by the way, bombed and destroyed every known training site that they were training at inside of Turkey. And I don't know if you know that place that they actually committed the terror attack, the Crocus. That was where President Trump hosted the U.S. Or the Miss Universe pageant.
Oh, I did not know that. That's another interesting. Wow. Well, we certainly appreciate your help coming on the show and talking through this, because I've been interested in the Operation Gladio aspect of this since I first learned about it. And you were one of the most studied people on that I could find. And I really do appreciate your time and the help with this. I know my audience liked it. We've got hands up, but I can't take them, guys. I'll get you in the after show. Maybe the Colonel will come into Spaces if we can keep it live long enough. And answer some questions too. But thank you so much. Where do folks find you, real quick, on the web and social media, so they can come and check you out?
Substack, The Colonel's Corner, on Rumble, The Colonel's Corner, and on X at Colonel Towner.
Well, thank you very much, Roxanne. We appreciate it. Thank you for your service, and I'm sure I'll get you on the show again sometime. Very, very informative and critical for people to understand what's going on in the world.
Absolutely.
Well, tomorrow on the Rob Maness Show on Truth Thursday, we've got Dr. Kat Lindley. She's working with the Sovereignty Coalition and other organizations to stop the pandemic treaty that's coming up on May 27th, so that the United States and other countries don't give up their sovereignty. I look forward to that conversation, and it's more linked right into what we've been talking about today, and this assassination attempt we'll talk about even more tomorrow, because it was the opposition to the WHO pandemic treaty that he last spoke about, the Prime Minister of the Slovaks over there. We'll see you tomorrow. Patriot.tv.
Consumers often ask, what should I expect when I take the Bella Grace elixir? And the answer's varied. It really depends on what your health and wellness needs are. I would consider this as your foundational core product for a whole range of health and wellness issues. Let me give you a few examples. If you're a little bit older and you have some joint health issues, some problems with mobility and discomfort, the elixir is going to be your best friend. If you have some skin health issues, wrinkles, hydration, aging, all of those elements are going to be benefited from the elixir, including age spots. Now, if you're in a younger demographic, maybe visual health is where you need some assistance. Eye fatigue, dry eyes, all of those are going to be benefited by the elixir. It's a core product because it benefits so many.